Hi, Mick. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. I'm excited to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Well, it's nice to have you here and discuss this one book that you wrote. I mean, the whole thing sounds really great. People want to make more money or at least to have their money work for them for sure. Well, I care about that. I'm sure others do. Now, before we do that, though, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you located? What kind of position you hold and what your job is and how you got to the point where you wrote this book?
Sure. Now I live in San Diego, and I grew up in Ohio, and not a lot of surfing in Ohio. But when we moved out here, my kids took to the ocean like magnets. And so they learned how to surf, and I decided, well, I'm going to spend some time with them, and I'll try that too. And interestingly enough, you can't do that without some stumbling and bumbling and falling in and it soon became a metaphor for the markets a little bit. And in fact, there's so many stories in my life that became metaphors for the market and investing. And so that kind of led to the book. And we can talk about that later. But I grew up in Ohio. I started working there after college at a very small investment counseling firm. And even though the first thing I thought of was, I want to make money. I want to, as everybody has that sex appeal with the markets. And I soon learned it was not easy. And some of my first stock purchases were not things that I would brag about, but they were great lessons. And that too led to learning about the markets in a very humble way, and also learning about helping people along the way. And when you're an investment counselor, it's not just about investing, it's about coaching people and having them learn that the long run, the long game is how you make money for most people.
Yeah.
And if we can focus on that, then all this noise that we get every day from the news and from the social media and all these things that can get us excited, you can just kind of push it away, because the long game, it doesn't matter. And I guess getting back to that surfing metaphor, if you're looking at the ocean and all the things that are happening there, you're going to go right into the drink. And that's what was happening to me at the beginning.
Right.
And when I started looking for the shore or looking outward, all of a sudden I was up for a moment or two, and I felt that calmness. And so that's kind of through a lot of my stories, what I wanted to pass on to the readers is that all of us need to deal with our emotions when we're dealing in the markets. But if we can do that, then we can look for that long game and try to push that noise away from us.
Okay. I myself never played the markets, but I was unionized for 15 years when I was working at a television network. And the question was, do you want to have some deductions taken for a retirement plan? So for 17 years, I said sure. And 40 years, actually 38 years after I started there, I was no longer working there. That money came up to about $250,000, which, for me, that sounded pretty good and helped me with my retirement. I didn't do anything. I just said, sure, take some money out. That's not playing the market. Playing the market, as you say, is actually paying attention to it. And
Well, but there's a great lesson in just what you said,
mm,
is that there was a great trader back in about 100 years ago named Jesse Livermore. And if you ever Google Jesse Livermore, you get some wonderful quotes about trading. But one of his great quotes says, he never made much money from trading. He made more of his money from sitting. Exactly what you did.
mhm,
You put the money away. You didn't think about it a whole lot. You didn't, quote, play the market, but in fact, you were investing in the market. And in a second job I had, I was working for a company in Louisville, and we worked for a bunch of union plans. And you got to know the people, and you felt really good that a lot of these union workers didn't really understand the market, but they really wanted to have something for their retirement. And by investing in a very conservative way, we were helping them achieve that. And so that's one of the good parts of my business, is feeling you're helping people along the way when they want to focus on their lives. They don't want to, quote, play the market. And I think for most people, by focusing on the long run, you don't have to feel like you're in there trading all the time. I think that's probably more destructive than the investing that you were doing without even thinking about it.
Well, I had the benefit of being just asked that question. And then I said, yeah. And then the rest of it's taken care of. There's people whose jobs it is just to figure out where they should diversify for you. I'm sure there's people working on mine and many other people's retirement funds. But what about people who aren't asked that question, who then have to go turn to a book like this to learn how to do it themselves?
Well, and one of the first things you should learn, if you're not asked that question, but you were, but we should all think about that, because one of the ways that you were able to do that is you were asked the question to deduct the money from your paycheck.
Hmm.
In fact, you were paying yourself first.
Yeah.
You were paying yourself before you were paying electricity or rent or anything else. And I have a client who he had, I think, 15 grandchildren, and he always bragged. He said, I told every one of them, pay yourself first. Because if you wait for the end of the month, it's not going to happen.
Hmm. Yeah.
We're all going to spend our money. We all do this.
Yeah.
But if you conduct a little bit, whatever that is, it can turn into that $250,000
Hmm.
or more, as time goes on.
Yeah.
And so that is a great lesson, and one that I hope that, I covered in some of the stories in my book, but certainly a valuable one for everyone out there.
What would a person who's not like me, who didn't have that opportunity, where do they start?
So the first thing you do is you need to at least have some basic savings account that's for your emergency, because you never want to put, say, all your money in stocks or some investment, because I almost can invariable that when you need the money, you had a flat tire or the car breaks down or the roof leaks, and you go to sell a stock, that stock is down. It's just the way the universe seems to laugh at us. And so you want to have that emergency fund for that. And then once you've established that, then you can put some money away. And the other part that all of us should deal with once we start to get to the point where we can start investing is, how much can you lose? How much can you deal with without getting scared out when a surprise happens? I think we've all know that there are things that happen all the time that are surprises, that are
Mhm.
out of the blue.
Right.
And I'm sure when these things happen, there's somebody on TV that says, "Oh, I knew that was going to happen." Well, maybe, maybe not. I would, sometimes people would say, "Oh, I predicted the 2008 crisis," and I look back and, well, they were saying there was going to be a crisis in 1998. I mean, so if
Yeah,
you say the same thing long enough, eventually you'll be right. But
sure.
for most of us, if we can put that money aside that's for investment and we don't get scared, then when a pandemic happens or when the next thing happens, we're not scared. We have strong hands.
Hmm.
I remember talking to a couple back in 1987, and they were very worried about a crash that would happen, that potentially could happen. And so, ironically, I wish I had listened to them about the potential for a crash, but instead, what we looked at is they're retired folks. And we said, how much could you take if we did have a crash? And right back then, they had about 30 or 40% of their money in stocks, and the rest of it in bonds and cash, very conservative. Well, they said, okay, if their market crashed, their money would go down X%. And I said, that's okay. That wouldn't scare us. We'd still have enough income to live on. We'd still have enough money to do the things we want. So we wouldn't get scared. Well, guess what? 3 weeks later, the market crashed
Oh, wow.
out of the blue. So I had to call him up and say, I don't know how you knew this was happening, but look what happened. They said, it's okay, Mick. You showed us what could happen. Now it looks like it's time to buy some stocks. They
Yeah,
had strong hands
right.
and they could do the thing. And believe me, the headlines were not pleasant. They're never pleasant when the market's at the bottom. But if you have strong hands, you can ignore the noise and say, oh, now I have less stocks, but they're at a bargain price. I can buy them.
Yeah.
I guess that gets back to what I consider one of the most important things when you're looking at investing is dealing with your emotions. Because we all get scared when times are bad, and we all feel comfortable when times are good, and those emotions are not necessarily helpful.
Hmm.
If we pay attention to them, then we realize, oh, I'm really scared, but this isn't a bad thing for investing.
Right.
But we need to pay attention to our emotions. And thankfully for me, I was never a numbers guy. I loved literature and philosophy and Russian literature. And
Hmm.
that taught me a lot more about the stock market than any kind of
Really?
math class was going to
Wow.
do.
That's interesting. How did that help you with money? How do you tie that together?
Well, it's because that what I realized over time is it is the psychology and knowing our own psychology that can really drive us to do the right things at the right time. Or if as you said, you're just sitting there not worried and comfortable that your funds are diversified, then when times are bad, you don't make the panicky move. And so the rules of investing are not that complicated. You could Google how to invest, and you're going to see, six or eight, major things that you need to pay attention to. But if you haven't dealt with your own emotions, the minute something surprising happens, you'll do the wrong thing.
Hmm.
And that's what those rules don't talk about. And that's what the philosophy and of cycles and you start to realize that um, just when times are good, the cycle goes the other way, and that has happened throughout history.
Hmm.
One of my early lessons that I is back in the early 80s, and our first little computer came, and no one knew what to do with it, and you didn't have the internet, so you couldn't put anything, in the computer. You turned it on and nothing happened. And so we thought, well, let's get some charts of some of the, economic numbers. Well, how could you get a chart? You had to go back to the library and get the data. And so well, I was the young guy that was assigned, go to the library and get this data. And so I started with some of the newspapers back in the early 30s and late 20s and had to move forward each week to get the data to get, to input into the computer. Well, what I discovered was, and I never took a history class like this, each week there was a headline that looked like the end of the world was coming. And of course, you knew there was another week. The world never did end and still isn't. And yet each week, if you read the headlines, you were worried about something. And what a lesson that was for me to realize this is what people were dealing with all the time. I mean, how many times have we said or we've heard, with this election coming, oh, this is different. Oh, this is a different thing. Well, guess what they were saying in 1935 or 1941? This is different. It's never happened before.
Hmm.
Even though the actual circumstances change, the emotions of feeling, they haven't changed for thousands and, hundreds of thousands of years.
Right. Yeah, I get it.
By the way, I read a great book called Sapiens, and it, kind of
Oh,
charted human history from
okay.
the beginning of time. And
Yep.
he had a great quote in there. I'm not going to quote it directly, but something like, back in the caveman days, there were snotty teenagers, rolling their eyes at their parents. Things don't change.
Yeah. I feel that way sometimes when I'm 67, so people my age are talking about those young people, how, and I say, don't you remember when we were young, the old people called us all kinds of names and said we were spoiled and we were entitled. I mean, they called us the me generation in the 70s, you know?
Exactly. And
I,
and it just doesn't,
yeah, nothing
and
changes.
all
That's
the
right. I
teenage
can have,
emotions and
for
the
sure,
hormones,
for
they've
sure.
been there since the beginning of time.
Yeah. Yeah. We all go through that awkward time. I want to add something about my life here because perhaps someone who's watching this can relate to this. So when I did leave that job where I was unionized and I went freelance and I started making more money that way, but I took that portfolio with me. the network wasn't going to hold on to it. It's mine. I had to do something with it. So I went to my bank and I said, here, you do something with it. And they were glad to take it. And for a while, it was, going up and up and up. Now, help me here. Help me with the terminology because I'm not that smart. There's bonds, and then there's investing in things like gold and what's that term called?
So you'd say alternative investments or
Well, here in Canada, there's two words. One is paper, and the other one is actual tangible things.
tangible things, right,
Yeah.
right.
Okay. So I had a 60-40 split. I mean, the bank talked me into a safe way to do it, 60% in bonds and 40% that other stuff, because that can go up and down a lot. Well, it just so happened that it went up quite a bit, a lot. And so at that time, we decided, hey, let's flip it over to 60% equities or
Oh
whatever,
yeah.
and 40% bonds. And for a while, it was just getting up there. You could see it growing like crazy. One day, my wife calls me at work and says, we just lost $15,000. I said, where? Hopefully we can find it, you know?
Right. And when what drawer?
Yeah. And so that kind of scared us and go, maybe we should go back to that other 60-40 split, which soon after that, about a week later, we did because something was happening in the world that was causing that.
Well, and that's a great lesson because when you set those objectives and that 40-60 split that you had originally, they probably explained to you with that split, you could lose if things went against you at a certain point, you could lose X amount of dollars.
Mhm.
And so one of the disciplines that I follow is I pay it because that's not just a long-term goal that you've set, but it's also your risk tolerance. And everyone's different. Some people could stand that $15,000 loss and they don't care. But some people can't. And so that's important to get from the outset correctly.
Yeah.
And so another way of dealing with what happened would have been to keep that 40-60 split. And when the tangible assets rose to say 50-50 because they overwhelmed the performance of the bond. So now you're 50-50. Instead of changing your objectives, you take some profit. You sell the, part of the tangible
Okay.
assets, not the whole thing, but part of the tangible assets back to that 40%. So now you've taken money out of the risky thing and you're putting it back in the conservative thing.
Okay.
Now, what could have happened after that? It still goes up. Well, then your wife is saying, why'd we sell? Oh my God, look at what we could have made. It's
Yeah.
okay
Yeah.
because you still have 40% there. You're cheering it on. Go, make more money and you sell it again. I have a stock, Eli Lilly, that makes this drug that helps people lose weight. And I originally bought it because it had a good dividend yield. It was yielding about 4%, which at the time was yielding more than bonds. I didn't buy it because it was going to be a home run. I bought it because it had a good dividend yield and I thought it had solid earnings. Well, the stock starts going up and up and up. And I'm thinking, well, now it's not a 2% holding of stock. Now it's 3 and now it's too high. And so I sold a little bit, took gains for my clients. Well, it kept going up. And I'm thinking, well, that first buy sell was dumb. I sold it again. Well, over time, you keep selling and selling and selling, and you're still rooting for it. And so I think if you don't do that, Apple would be another example, or Microsoft. These stocks that have kept going up, if you don't ever take profits, they're going to dominate your portfolio.
Yeah.
And then if something bad happens, you have that call in the during the day of,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, look what happened.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big believer in that. One of the stories in my book, I talk about a rock climbing experience I had. And I was on a trip and we had scrambled up this high area and there was no way down. And so the only way down was to climb down, and it was so scary from the top. It's always scarier looking down than it is, of course, looking up. And so finally, I got the nerve to climb down, and they're coaching me down these different handholds or footholds. And at one point, I couldn't move. I was literally just frozen. I felt my foot might be slipping. And they're going, Mick, Mick, you can do it, and they're cheering me on. And finally, a voice in my head said, "Oh yeah, I can do it." And of course, then I, eventually got to the bottom. And this woman back then took a Polaroid picture of me at that, hanging out, frozen on the rock. And guess how high I was? 4 feet.
Oh, really?
At that moment, it was perceived risk. It wasn't
Right,
real risk.
right, right. Yeah.
And how often do we get more scared at the perceived risks in our lives than the real risk?
Yeah.
And so, drawing that comparison to that market thing is that you think you're safe because an asset keeps going up, but that's real risk.
Yeah, yeah.
Perceived risk is, oh, I have 30 or 40% here, I'm okay.
Okay. That's interesting. I had a similar experience when I first came to the Maritimes. I was in my 30s and I was a regular mountain climber in the Adirondacks, but when I was
Oh,
all equipped and everything. So we visited the Bay of Fundy. Maybe you've seen pictures of these large rock formations that jut out of the ocean. They're very pretty. And I said,
okay.
I'm gonna climb that. I did. Coming back down. Wow. That was something else. So when you were telling your story, you go, oh, I can feel that. I really feel it. Yeah.
It's
Oh,
so funny. Yeah, from the height, I don't know what it is,
yeah.
but look
Um,
down, you go,
Going down is
whoa.
all, always worse than going up. Well, cats go up in trees and then firefighters have to go save them, right? That's the joke.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I'll tell you of another thing that can happen to anybody who's got some investments and why having investments is a good thing because my career ended abruptly at age 60. I had a brain aneurysm and
No.
that was the end of my career. So that money that I had I could start cashing in, of course, having to pay taxes all the time. And actually, the good thing was they always overcharged on my taxes. So when I did my taxes the following year, I even got more money back from having been overcharged. So I would advise people to have something like what I had because you never know what can happen to you.
Well, and just think of how money grows. You don't have to, of course, there's all the excitement about Bitcoin or, back a few years ago, it was these meme stocks and people were talking about how they made, instant fortunes, so to speak.
Hmm.
Um, but for most of us, we only have to do what you did. Put money away each month, each week, and the paycheck and let it grow. And it's shocking, with compounding, how much money can grow to if you just do things slowly and don't, get panicked when the bad times happen.
Yeah.
And I remember a colleague at work, we were all just chatting with someone, and they had said they just bought a car and they said, and only for like $5,000, I was able to add this, this, and this, and that. And, just, how excited they were. And my colleague looked at them and they said, that didn't cost you $5,000. That cost you $50,000. Because had you invested that $5,000 and let it compound over 25 years, that's what that money could come up to. And it was it was a great lesson, and I'll always remember the look on that person's face. Well, I could have bought another car with that $5,000 and later in my life.
Yeah.
So it's something that we all should pay attention to.
Yeah, for sure. I started out as a young man buying my vehicles cash. They weren't great cars. And now I'm back to buying my vehicles cash because that's all I could do. But in between, I was torn. Should I rent? Should I lease? And I
Mhm.
did both, and I still don't know which is a better way.
I don't either.
Yeah.
I think it depends. My sister just asked me the same thing, and I've asked my dad, and we all chat about the same thing. And one thing I do know, whether you lease or you buy or you borrow, when you walk out of that car place, they're smiling because they're happy. They've made money on you any which way that you do it, and it's more a lifestyle thing. And for some people, I think the leasing allows them to put more money away. It just becomes a monthly thing. And for other people, they'd rather bite the bullet and buy it and then drive that car for the next 15 years and not think about it. And
Mhm.
so I don't think it's as much an economic decision as it is, a quality of life. Although I do think that if you can drive a car for 15 years, that's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Most of us don't get that lucky with our cars.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what I'm doing now. And it seems to make sense. Now, what you do for a living, I suppose you have individual clients that you work helping them invest?
I do, and that's been from the get-go. I started with a very small firm, and we had individual clients, and I loved that part of the business. And then I had the opportunity to work for an institutional firm in the 90s, and that was working for, as we had talked about, for union plans and for foundations and for corporations, managing 401(k) plans, that type of thing. A very exciting and very profitable part of the business, but and you know you're helping people because people are part of the plans, like you were part of that union plan, but you don't get that direct feeling of really helping people. And so when I
Hmm.
moved out to San Diego, I went back to helping individual clients, and I love that. I love the being able to help coach. And sometimes I have one client who was very unlucky early in his life. He was working, and his investment person got him all into technology stocks, very heavily weighted into technology right before they blew up in the early 2000s, the dot-com thing.
Yeah.
Well, he keeps working and he's saving money, and he works with another investment advisor. And of course, they got all into bank stocks right before the 2008 financial crisis. And so he's back to work. And one of the lessons there is don't overdo anything.
Yeah.
Don't let, because who could have predicted some of this stuff? But anyway, he came to me, and so very skeptically, I talked about how we're going to diversify, so not one thing is going to overwhelm him.
Yeah. Hmm.
And what over time, every time there's an election that's worrisome, or a government shutdown that's out there, or the pandemic, or even littler things that people can worry about, he'll call me up, and I would just say, look at how we're diversified. And yes, things may not be as good as they were, but because of our balance, we're okay. Now he calls me up and he says, I know what you're going to say, but I want to hear it one more time. I want to,
Okay.
and so that's part of the fun is kind of coaching people along.
Yeah. Well, this is 2024, and we're just a few days away from the US elections. And leading up to that, and for the past couple of years, I've been hearing this about how the economy is doing fabulously. And the stocks have never been so high. Wall Street is just, there's all records being set. Eh, First of all, is that true? And secondly, how does that affect the average American person?
So that's kind of interesting because the market works on first, like you say, it's emotion driven, and it's also based on how companies are doing with their profits. And so yes, the market is at all-time highs. It's actually driven by a lot of these technology companies that are making a lot of money, making things more productive, and having sometimes less people involved in making those profits. And so there's sometimes a disconnect because a lot of people are facing unemployment or facing inflation and not doing as well in their lives. And they're thinking, this economy is not doing well for me.
Yeah.
I'm having to pay a higher price for milk and eggs. And I may have to switch jobs because the companies become more efficient. And so just because the market's up, it may help your portfolio, and that's not a bad thing. But on the other hand, your life is tougher. And so I think that's the thing that many Americans have dealt with. Is the economy helping me or not?
Hmm.
And the other thing that I think most people don't realize is the economy is doing okay in America. The market is doing great because interest rates have been stable for the last couple of years and inflation is much lower. And that's often what drives the market because if inflation is low and interest rates are not too high, then companies can continue to make money. And so there is a disconnect between the market and the economy. there are a lot of people out there who've been predicting a recession in the United States for a couple of years. Oh my gosh, if this happens, we're going to have a recession or a slowdown. And they think, oh, if I could predict the recession, I can predict the stock market. I've seen plenty of recessions where the stock market goes up,
Yeah.
confounding people even more.
Wow.
Imagine this. Imagine you knew somehow through some psychic thing that there was going to be a pandemic in 2020. You knew that was going to happen. And you knew the economy was going to be shut down. People were going to be at home for most of the year, not doing anything other than hopefully listen to your podcast.
Yeah.
If you knew the answer to that, you probably would have sold every stock you owned,
Mhm.
right? I mean, of course. Well, the stock market was actually up 15% in 2020. It was a great year in the market.
Wow.
Had to do with interest rates, had to do with, some of the bailout packages that happened. So knowing the future of the headlines even doesn't necessarily tell you what the stock market's going to do. And guess what? I won't either. I don't, what I've learned is we have to deal with an uncertain world, both with what's happening
Mhm.
and with the market. And if we can do that, that gets back to your allocation. If you can deal with uncertainty, you say, okay, I'm going to have 40%, and I know it might wiggle a little bit, and I'm not going to be able to predict it.
Yeah.
But over a long period of time, it's going to work out. And that's what I learned from watching those headlines.
Yeah.
Over the long run, we do okay.
Hmm. I guess I'm somewhat representative of an average worker, though my career was exciting in television and film and all that, but still it was a job. I was a technician. So while my portfolio was visibly growing, and I was freelance by this point, I was 52, I think, well, I was 55 in 2012. And around 2010, 2011, I was still making about 120,000 a year, on average. But by the time 2014 rolled around, I'm down to about 70. And just a year before I had my brain aneurysm was just under 60. But my stocks were going up, my portfolio was going up, but we definitely felt the pinch. And so I can relate to what you're saying. I didn't have much time, and then it didn't affect me that badly, but I did notice that I'm making less on a daily basis. Grocery prices are getting up. Oh yeah, my stocks are doing fine, which I
Yeah,
couldn't touch until at least I was 60, and even
no,
then.
that's right. And it's always it's a political football. If the
Yeah,
market's up, guess what? The president will take credit for that.
yeah, I
And,
guess so.
okay, good for you.
Yeah, it felt weird to have all this money that I can't touch, and I'm worried about, well, should can we pay the cable bill this month or should we hold off for another month? But there's like $270,000 sitting somewhere that I can't
No,
have.
right.
Yeah.
And in a way it's a good and bad thing. It forces us to have that money kind of set away and try to force you to live within your means.
Yeah,
And yet I think if somehow we have to have some balance in our lives and moderation. Of course, I'm constantly telling people to save and this and that, but I'm also telling you to enjoy your life.
yeah,
And hopefully we get to the point, not all of us make it to the point where we get that money,
yeah.
and so if you didn't enjoy it along the way, that's not good. And yet
Right,
when you get that money, you also want to parcel that out so you can enjoy it.
right. Eh,
And I know when my mom she passed away at a fairly young age, and we knew she was going to, and so she was spending a lot of her money, or one of her love is going shopping. And I knew she was spending more money than, would be normal if she was going to live till she got their 90s, but she wasn't. And I just sat there, the market bailed her out here and there, and she had a great, happy life until things ended for her.
yeah.
But we all have to kind of judge, that quality of life. I had a client one time, she wanted to see her grandkids, and she had gotten to an age that it was very difficult, and yet she had lots of money. And it's like, well, what are you saving it for? Fly first class. Do, if you have that money at a certain age, you say, how much can I spend and I'll be okay? And she came back and she said, that was the best advice you ever gave me. And I thought, all these stocks I've been buying, and my best advice was fly
Mm.
first class.
Why not? Why not? You want to talk about your website? I was just there before you came on here. I was checking it out.
Sure. What I hopefully do on the website is it's mellowyourmoney.com. And what I'd like to do is allow people to kind of get a touch of what I'm trying to say in my book about Mellow Your Money. There's a free chapter in there, I think, for people, and I think it's about my first client that I met, and the lesson there, by the way, was she outperformed almost every client with her investments. And we used to call the strategy benign neglect. Sound
Mhm.
familiar?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what you were doing,
yeah, yeah.
letting it go. And all the in and outs that we were doing for other people at the time, guess who was outperforming? It was Eloise. Anyway, I think it's a fun chapter, even though I gave it away a little bit.
That's good.
But also in the website are some of the blogs that I've done and some of the links that I've done, which include a lot of the podcasts, which if you want to know a little more about me or a little more about the book and at least about what the lessons are, I think it's a good chance for people to get to know me a little better.
Yeah. And how's the book doing for sales wise?
It's actually picked up a great deal recently, led by working with some of the podcasts and I am an investment advisor by nature for the last 40 years. I'm not what you'd call a natural author, and so I didn't know what to expect. But it's done fairly well, above my expectations. I got a lot of help from this editor. Each week we would talk about a potential chapter, and then I'd write, and then she'd come back and say, write it again. We want
Mhm.
to learn more about this woman, or we want to know more about this experience. And so it was quite a different experience for me to write this book and get my thoughts down and expound more, talk about the stories and how that emotion affected me.
Mhm.
And so, this work that I had with the editor was a fantastic lesson and taught me a lot. I had to reflect back in my life. What were those important stories that kind of helped me learn to invest better? And so that whole experience was fantastic. And hopefully that comes through and partly in the website and partly in the, talks that I'm involved with.
Okay. I still want to talk about your book. Something occurred to me with your last answer. Your book has stories in it, like true stories that people could glean something from.
Absolutely. And each chapter is a story that peppered in each chapter are great quotes from history, from investment people, from religious people, from philosophers, from Buddha, from anything that I thought was appropriate to the lesson that I was trying to put forth. So each chapter has great quotes. It has movies that were, again, some were investment type of movies. Some were movies that were just, affected our emotions.
Hmm.
And so each chapter has, some, relation that way so people could identify with. And then each chapter has a story of my life that taught me something, not just about investing, but about, living a more happy
Mm.
and meaningful life. And so I try to put it all in there. It's not a textbook.
Yeah,
As I said, you can Google anything and get how to invest well. But
sure.
I think without that, leaning on experiences, it doesn't register as good. And
Yeah.
so this is why I wanted to do something a little different than what I thought was out there.
Well, that's great. I'm really liking the direction of this book. When was it released?
It was released a little over a year ago in July of 2023. And since I was not an author that was known, and I have my own little boutique business, it was from the beginning, we knew it was not going to be a, sometimes they say, oh, it's the release date and think of how many books you're going to sell. And I'm thinking, no one knows me. It's
Yeah.
my friends and family, and half of them I'm giving books away to, it's
Yeah.
not going to be a big, party and celebration and half of America is like saying, oh, Mick has a book coming out.
Mhm.
No, it was going to be a slow kind of rise. And that's what's happened is I probably sold more books in the last 30, 45 days than I did the first 3 months of the book coming out.
Yeah.
So it was really about slowly getting this message out and getting people kind of interested in, oh, this is a different way of getting stress out of my life about my money.
Sure.
And so it's been a slow but consistent process.
Hmm. And you have a team working with you.
Yes. Black Chateau and Desiree is the leader there, and they're fantastic, getting me to be introduced to people like you and some other things. And um, they are
Yeah.
it's fun to see them excited about the book and about the message too. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
very helpful.
It came to mind when you were talking about quotations. In one of my books, I put some quotations in it. I thought it'd be cool to do that. I was trying to get some ideas across, and it was flagged at Amazon. They said, "Okay, you can do that, but I need permission." And I put so many quotations, like I don't know, where do I even start? The quotations you put in, I guess your team took care of all the legal matters that are to do with
Yeah, I
it.
think they took care of that and they footnoted everything. They had a fact checker that really went back and even little things like in my memory, the market dropped 25% in one day in 1987.
Hmm.
That's how I remembered it.
Okay.
Well, actually, it was 22%.
Okay.
Pretty close,
Wow.
but it wasn't 25. That
Right.
fact checker checked every little detail.
Excellent. Well, you get what you pay for, right?
And so it was worthwhile and
Definitely.
I was always thrilled to see somebody correct me because
Yes.
now what they didn't correct was the story. No one went out and checked on my rock climbing experience. And
Yeah.
that came and I think I have a little note in the front of the book. I say something like these are stories from my memory.
Hmm.
And you may recognize people in here, and you may recognize yourself, and you might be right, and you might be wrong. But this is from my memory. And
Yeah.
of course, it's general investment theory and talking. Don't necessarily take exact investment advice from a memoir. So something
Yeah.
like that.
Sure. Excellent. Well, let's give it an elevator pitch for this book, and then you can tell people why they should order it and where they can get it.
I think that if you're the type of person that learns from stories and wants to have a little fun too, I try to, and that I was helped by the editor to have these stories be very readable and hopefully laugh along with some of my misadventures along the way. You can get the book on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or many of these places. If you just put in Mellow Your Money in Amazon, the book is there. It's in hardback, soft cover, and Audible. And that was an audio book. And that was another great experience for me. I've read my own book. So if you can't stand my voice, don't get the Audible version of it.
Excellent. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Mick. Not a topic that I generally discuss, but you made it really personable, and I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope it all
Well,
went well for
thanks.
you.
I really enjoyed it too, John. And you came at it from a different angle, which is always fun. And I think I love the process of just kind of digging into what I've done and trying to present it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I started this channel on the basis of we just met at a social gathering somewhere. You told me you wrote a book, and I said, really? Tell me all about it. Basically, that's what this is.
That's fantastic. And I think it's a great way for people to be entertained. And I would encourage this type of way as opposed to getting stuck in social media, which only gets us aggravated.
Okay. All right, Mick. Well, it was a lot of fun, and I wish you well in the future. You take care of yourself.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate the opportunity.
thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, and if you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then I invite you to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and even leave a comment if you wish. And if you are an author, I would sure love to hear from you. Until such time, keep on writing, and remember to be kind to one another.